If Godzilla Minus One has a sequel, would it be called Godzilla Zero or Godzilla Minus Two? Godzilla Minus One, Japan's Toho Studio, brings us a brand new iteration of the famous lizards that we're all familiar with outside of Hollywood's current monster universe. Post-World War II Japan is at its lowest point when a new crisis emerges in the form of a giant monster baptized in the horrific power of the atomic bomb. So yeah, worth mentioning off the bat that this is a Japanese film and I watched it with subtitles, and this will also be a spoiler-free review. I just really enjoyed watching Minus One, and there's one key ingredient as to why this is up there as one of the better monster films around, despite having a fraction of the Hollywood blockbuster budget. And it's the characters. The story centers around Koichi, a pilot during the end of Second World War in a kamikaze division. Having doubted the need to sacrifice himself for a war already lost, he's riddled with guilt and has his own inner demons to battle with at the same time as Godzilla showing up and wreaking havoc. Through chance, he ends up living with a woman and a baby she found after the parents were bombed, and it's such an interesting dynamic watching this trio grow over the span of a few years, watching a family environment that you wouldn't typically see in a Hollywood film. And it's not just them. We're introduced to Koichi's ragtag companions who get swept into the centre of all this, an ex-scientist during the war, a veteran, and a young kid who was never drafted. And it's watching the interactions between these four that will carry a lot of the movie. All these characters are so likeable that when disaster comes, you actually give a shit about them. You could honestly take Godzilla out of this and it'd still be an interesting character-focused drama. Granted, you might have to change the name of the title. This time period, I think it's between 1945 and 1947, it's a great idea because there's just so much to do with this. Seeing Japan's side of things post-war, their depression, poverty, and their loss of faith in the government, not having the technology of firepower you'd see in modern day monster films, it's just the perfect time to throw Godzilla in, throwing Japan from ground zero to an even worse state. Yeah, that's right, it's Minus One. So the success of the film comes even before you talk about Godzilla, and then everything else comes as an added bonus. The film's budget was reportedly $15 million, but I think that's been confirmed not to be the case, but maybe even less, which is nuts. A hilarious comparison. One episode of She-Hulk cost $25 million, almost double. And it looks so much better than it should on a budget of this size. Granted, there are reasons behind why you can make a CGI monster film on such a smaller budget in Japan. Japan's visual effects workforce work for far less pay than companies in America traditionally would. I also don't believe star power salaries are as much of a thing in Japan either, where an actor in America could be tied to a film and demand 5 to 15 million. It's just not so much the case overseas. And then it's an added bonus that Minus One's director was also lead visual effects supervisor as well. So they had that clear vision already in place of where they needed to use CG. A far different strategy than you might see in Marvel, where they have the visual effects artists make 50 versions of a laser and then choose one that they like after they've done all the work already. And with all that said, I mean, there's still parts of the film you look at here and you can tell where the corners were cut for budget purposes. Godzilla itself is awesome. Not an anti-hero, he's just flat out an awful villain in this. And he's just wrecking shit up and it's so much fun to watch. Not even eating people, he's just whipping his tail around trying to stack up the death count. And I think they focus on the right things to make him appear genuinely well made. His general walking feels a bit robotic and weird, but anytime it comes to him throwing himself around or smashing through cities, it looks great. The pacing of the film was planned well enough for the most part so that even though we probably get as much Godzilla in this as we did in 2014's Godzilla, you never get too long without him being like, is this guy going to show up anytime soon? There's a great water scene where Godzilla chases a small tugboat where you generally have no idea who might die and how they're going to get out of it. It's a well shot, tense moment, but I think it shows Godzilla enough to make him terrifying but not necessarily expensive. Also, Godzilla's atomic breath, phenomenal. I won't spoil it, but you will see it a handful of times in the film, and if you can see this in cinemas, it's worth doing so just to see that alone. The way they tried going about defeating Godzilla is interesting too. The science behind the final battle was fun, and it felt more original than just, let's say, a big explosion. Harboring back to it being in this time period, I think it forces the writers to be creative with how they go about this. There are some obvious green screen moments, and some animations on Godzilla here or there, especially towards the end, do look a bit questionable, but because you're enjoying the characters and the story so much, it gives you that suspension of disbelief to not let any of it bother you all that much. Where they do use physical sets, they're really interesting to look at, and it might be just because it's very different to what you might see back in Hollywood. The music is mostly good too, although the final score at the end of the film made me laugh a little bit, and that might be the OG Godzilla soundtrack. It just sounded a bit out of place. Yeah, I don't really have anything else bad to say about it though. It's a really endearing drama with a unique way of presenting Godzilla as a vicious monster. If watching foreign films doesn't put you off, this is a recommendation from me. Even if monster films in the past haven't been your thing, there's lots outside of that which just makes this suspenseful and entertaining. So yeah, that's Godzilla -1. Great stuff. It came out in the UK last weekend and it's had a staggered release around the world, so if it's still available in cinemas for you, I'd recommend checking this out. If you've already seen it, I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments below. If you liked this review, feel free to like and subscribe and all that. I'm putting out reviews every week, and as always, stay tuned for more reviews on movies, anime and video games. Until next time guys, take care. Bye bye.